Venice, the Celeste Vineggia, emerged out of the waters around 2,000 years ago. Venice, like Botticelli's Venus, was born out of the foam of the sea. Beautiful. Enigmatic. This unique historical city was built on a collection of islands in the center of a lagoon. But today, Venice is in jeopardy. Rising sea levels due to global warming and the sinking of the land on which the city rests mean that the survival of this most precious jewel of art and history is far from secure. The high waters that are sinking Venice are increasing dramatically. The sea, for centuries the city's greatest ally, has now become its most dangerous enemy. Will Venice manage to win its age-old battle with the sea? Tourists flock to Venice all year round. There is no tourist season. A steady stream of people constantly invades a city whose permanent population barely reaches 60,000. Venice is a great open-air museum that never closes. Bridges and canals wind between sumptuous palaces and magnificent churches. Unforgettable sights. Exhibitions, museums, masks, and theatres. Few cities in the world can boast such an impressive concentration of major tourist attractions. In Venice, you come across tourists from all over the world, here to admire works of art of inestimable value. Whether on a gondola or on foot, wandering aimlessly among the little alleyways, we arrive here in the heart of the city, the place that is home to all the symbols and the history of the magnificent Serenissima, the magnificent Piazza San Marco, the centerpiece of the Venetian stage.
I like this plaza and I like the mood.
Si no estás enamorado, vienes a Venecia y te enamoras.
Et on est venu visiter Venise pendant 2 jours et je trouve que c'est très beau et c'est magnifique, surtout la place Saint-Marc.
Here we can admire the sumptuous facade of the St. Mark's Basilica and the magnificent ducal palace, symbol of the history and grandeur of the Serenissima, the Venetian Republic. But the high water is always lying in wait. This most famous of piazzas is the lowest point above sea level in Venice, just 80 centimeters. And so, it is Piazza San Marco that warns us of the invasion of high water. In the 20th century, the formidable power of the volume of water displaced by exceptionally high tides led to one of the most tragic episodes in recent memory. The high tide of November the 4th, 1966. Nearly 2 meters of water invaded the city for 48 hours. Piazza San Marco found itself underwater and for an entire day was swept by a fierce sirocco wind of over 100 miles an hour, which whipped up enormous waves, creating an apocalyptic scene. Telephone lines, water supplies and electricity supplies were all disrupted. Tons of fuel, oil, wood and coal poured into the canals. The city was cut off and all activity paralysed. The walkways that had been set up proved useless. Equally useless were attempts by shopkeepers and public offices to defend themselves against the mighty tide that rendered not only the heart of Venice, but also every little nook and cranny of the city impassable. Gondolas and boats of all kinds sank under the force of the waves that had slammed them against the foundations of the buildings. The water did not recede until the wind changed direction, leaving behind a devastated city. As well as floods, Venice has experienced other extreme weather conditions in the course of its history. In 1929, something incredible happened. During the night of the 3rd and 4th of January, the city was hit by terrible freezing temperatures, and the lagoon froze. The papers reported that the ice was so thick that it was possible to cross on foot to the island of Torcello. In the following days, Venice was struck by a snowstorm that added a further layer of ice. Ironically, Venice has struggled its whole life against 2 irreconcilable elements, water and fire. Almost all the constructions in the old centre are built on wooden structures. Venice is a tinderbox. Just one example is the repeated fires that have destroyed the theatre, La Fenice, a symbol of the city and the place of its greatest artistic expression. The last time was in January 1996. The magnificent theatre was engulfed in flames, the entire structure destroyed in a matter of hours. Venice is a unique city because of its history and its beauty, but also for its very special location. The lagoon, in which Venice is the largest island, is an area of approximately 550 square kilometres, covered by shallow salt water and separated from the sea by narrow strips of land, the littorals. The exchange of water between the lagoon and the sea takes place through 3 inlets, the bocche di porto, or port mouths, which allow the water to flow in and out of the lagoon. It is clear that an ecosystem like this lagoon is very complex and needs to be studied, observed and monitored extremely carefully. The tide centre of Venice has the task of monitoring and reporting the tide forecasts for the city of Venice and throughout the lagoon.
Indubbiamente l'attività più importante è l'attività di previsione. È qui che concentriamo la nostra ricerca proprio per determinare il valore della marea che entrerà nella città di Venezia.
The centre has a score of meteorological stations around the city and the lagoon, as well as a weather station on the open sea.
La stazione di piattaforma a mare, quella del Consiglio Nazionale di Ricerche, che è come una sentinella davanti alle 3 bocche di porto che ci dà l'informazione su cosa sta arrivando come onda di marea dal mare.
The Tide Centre furnishes daily data on tide levels.
Per quanto riguarda il livello di marea registrato nella città di Venezia, si assume come principale la stazione di Punta della Salute, che è situata in bacino San Marco.
To understand the causes of high water and the exceptionally high tide it causes in Venice, we must first understand that this phenomenon is influenced by several factors. The climatic conditions that form in the area of the low Adriatic are the main factor determining the phenomenon of high tides and the water invading the city.
La condizione meteorologica, soprattutto abbassamenti di pressione, forti repentini profondi, con associate perturbazioni e soprattutto il vento che si spira nella direzione dell'Adriatico, muove queste masse d'acqua, le sposta verso l'Alto Adriatico, che è un mare chiuso, e di conseguenza quest'onda entra in laguna attraverso le 3 bocche di porto.
The other factor is astronomical and regards the position of the moon and the sun in relation to the Earth.
Cioè noi abbiamo una marea ordinaria, una marea che chiamiamo astronomica, cioè dovuta all'interazione Luna, Sole e Terra, che muove queste masse d'acqua e le fa oscillare.
Furthermore, all closed basins such as lakes or seas like the Adriatic are crossed by a wave that comes and goes and is always equal. Here we call it the sessa. It's a kind of echo, a wall of water that constantly moves from south to north and vice versa. The high water phenomenon occurs when at least 2 of these 3 factors, adverse climate conditions, the astronomical disposition of the planets, and the sessa, coincide. It may seem strange, but Venice under high water does not come to a halt, but carries on with its everyday activities. Obviously, it depends just how high the tide is. As it gradually rises, the complications and the everyday problems for the Venetians and tourists increase. For example, walking around requires a pair of Wellington boots, but sometimes even they aren't enough. So walkways are positioned in the main streets of the city to allow people to move around.
Ci sono aree che vengono allagate a 90, a 100 cm, a 110 cm. Poi c'è una seconda quota ancora molto più alta, il 1,40 m, che è una quota di emergenza, una quota in cui interviene anche la protezione civile.
Everything in Venice moves by water, from deliveries of medication and food to the postal service and every other type of material.
Tutto passa per le barche a Venezia. Cibo, vestiti, medicinali, l'edilizia, qualsiasi cosa passa per la gomma sulla barca, perché non c'è possibilità di fare altrimenti.
If the tide rises too high, the boats have problems passing under the bridges, and there is a danger that the whole city will be paralyzed.
Perché se ci fermassimo potremmo creare dei disagi, però guarda, neve, pioggia, nebbia, non esiste, non ci fermiamo mai.
noi consegniamo la merce tutti i giorni, alberghi, ristoranti, e ci sono dei problemi quando c'è brutto tempo, pioggia, acqua alta, perché come vede sono tutte scatole di cartone. Però il peggio di tutti è quando c'è l'acqua alta, dobbiamo aspettare che l'acqua scenda, poi a tirare il carro con l'acqua alta ci sono le passerelle, non ci si passa, è un po' un problema.
Noi con i taxi, con i trasporti e nei momenti di alta marea si cerca percorsi alternativi dove è possibile, altrimenti il cliente deve adeguarsi alla situazione. A volte si bagna e a volte invece il cliente deve bagnarsi.
Venezia è particolare per questo, sia per i veneziani che per i postini, perché è l'unica città che si va a piedi. Anche noi abbiamo un carrettino, facciamo i ponti con questo carretto, portiamo la posta a piedi. Quando c'è l'acqua alta abbiamo degli stivali fino a Linguine, praticamente Venezia viene sommersa in qualsiasi zona più o meno e di conseguenza non ci salviamo.
Some areas become difficult to reach, if not completely inaccessible. Even reaching the hospital can become problematic.
Tutto si muove intorno all'acqua, sia i mezzi pubblici che i mezzi di emergenza, tutto si muove in mezzo all'acqua. Si sa che quando c'è l'acqua alta i problemi aumentano e non di poco, perché i ponti con l'acqua alta cominciano a essere bassi e le barche non ci passano sotto.
Bene.
E quindi automaticamente bisogna cercare vie alternative che non vanno bene per l'utenza.
Venice has two distinct characters. There's the tourist Venice, rather stereotypical, whose image is now an international icon. Then there's the Venice of the Venetians, those who live regularly with high water and always have done.
La fine di Canareggio vicino al ghetto, la fine di Castello vicino all'Arsenale, ecco, lì c'è ancora una Venezia che lei la sente parlare per la strada il vero veneziano ancora, ci sono i banchetti di frutta e verdura in via Garibaldi, c'è ancora il venditore che dice amore mio cosa vuoi. Credo che ogni città abbia due componenti fondamentali, che sono le pietre e la gente, e gli abitanti. Venezia ne ha una terza, che è l'acqua. Credo che sia l'unica città al mondo che ha bisogno dell'acqua come del sangue arterioso, del sangue venoso. Per 6 ore arriva dentro dal mare il sangue arterioso e esce venoso.
Water is the soul of Venice. It is the element on which it was founded. And it is the same water that characterizes the city and makes it unique in the world that may also drag it towards a dangerous deterioration.
Nettuno ha dato vita a Venezia, però ogni tanto se la riprende come monito, per dire non siete degni di tanta bellezza.
Ludovico de Luigi, a Venetian artist from way back, was painting Venice completely submerged by water as long ago as 1966. Perhaps it was a premonition.
Penso che sarò immortale per quello, perché ho dato una svisione diversa da tutte quante le altre visioni che sono state date prima di questa città meravigliosa.
Canareggio, one of the 6 districts of Venice, known as Sestieri, is one of the areas most damaged by the high waters that are the scourge of the city. Here, all the buildings have a strip at the base, about 50 centimetres wide, that is seriously compromised, made up of damaged plaster, salt deposits and mould. Andrea has a baker's in the heart of Canareggio.
Questo è il segno dell'acqua che è venuta nel 1966. È venuta alta così.
A lot of the conservation work has consisted of raising the level of the paving on the banks. But it's not enough. Stefano Nicolau is a costume designer and has a studio for masks and costumes.
Nel 2008 abbiamo avuto la visita dell'acqua fino a qui dentro. Io sono 1,60 m di altezza come pavimento e l'acqua è entrata per quasi 10 cm, danneggiando chiaramente molto.
L'acqua alta è un bel problema, ne abbiamo sempre. 2 anni fa, l'altro anno, è venuta anche 1,59 m, ci ha distrutto.
In this part of Venice, the high water is seriously threatening the entire urban fabric. High water is not like a hurricane. It is a slow and inexorable rise in level.
Si comincia a vedere l'acqua che arriva al bordo delle rive e comincia a tracimare, uscire dalle rive e avanza fino a che quando è già sulla soglia ormai si è spacciati perché non si sa più come fermarla.
Di solito viene così, viene alta così, però qui a Venezia, sul mio negozio, a 1,10 m già vado a fondi. L'acqua viene da sotto il pavimento.
The inhabitants are warned by sirens that inform them of the tide level through a code. But the Venetians know their city well. Very often they feel that the high water is arriving.
Si avverte un po' una sensazione intanto di un'umidità, di uno scirocco particolare, di un caldo unito a proprio uno stato atmosferico abbastanza particolare, irritante.
The high water is the main cause of the gradual decay of the artistic and architectural heritage of the city on the lagoon, as well as causing problems and disrupting everyday life in the city.
Bisogna alzare tutto, alle ceste bisogna sempre alzarle, quindi quando svuoti il pane, a volte il pane cade in acqua e lo butti via.
Entra dai muri dei vicini, entra dal pavimento, da piccole fessure.
Talmente forte l'acqua che viene da su che non si può fare niente, quindi usiamo i stivali alti.
One possible way to contain the damage caused by high waters is to give buildings in Venice drainage pumps to be put into action as soon as the waters infiltrate the perimeter walls. An alternative solution to drainage pumps would be to take all the buildings and to lift them by at least 20 centimetres. Impossible? Lifting the buildings of Venice is an idea that has gripped the collective imagination of the city's inhabitants since the very first time the waters of the lagoon lapped at the ground floors of their homes. In 1996 at Santa Marta, 62 hydraulic jacks were used to raise, by 40 centimetres, the House of the Seven Chimneys, a mass of 600 tons. Saving the House of the Seven Chimneys may seem a feat of engineering that verges on science fiction. But the idea of lifting single buildings or entire districts was later ditched. There is still a great deal of uncertainty as to how it could be achieved and what the results would be. Interventions of this kind cannot guarantee that levels will be uniformly raised in the historic centre, with buildings as fragile and as precious as those of the city on the lagoon. If on the one hand Venice is a marvellous city that never ceases to enchant, on the other it is a complex place that requires continuous attention and maintenance. The local authorities deal with the city's maintenance through the Insular Consortium, because the problem is not only the high water, but how to keep the city's services functioning.
A differenza di quello che a volte si può pensare, il problema della città non è difendersi soltanto dalle acque alte occasionali, ma di affrontare il rapporto con l'acqua, che è un rapporto positivo, ma complesso e problematico per 365 giorni all'anno.
One of the great enemies of Venice, apart from the high water, is humidity. The brackish humidity that emanates from the seawater. The humidity comes in through the walls, soaks into the bricks. When the water evaporates, the salt remains trapped in the walls. The salt then crystallizes, and so there is a danger that it will crack the bricks.
Vi mostro un pezzo dei tanti pezzi di mattone che si staccano quotidianamente dalle murature di questo immobile. C'è un'area salina sulla superficie di questo pezzo che si è staccato, e uno degli aspetti problematici della città, cioè la risalita della salinità nei muri, che comporta la necessità di un processo di manutenzione quotidiano e continuo, insomma, della città.
In other words, we need to save the public, private and commercial Venice that inhabits the alleys and the squares that are now so dangerously close to being uninhabitable. In the past, one possible solution was to use a strip of white pietra d'Istria, an impermeable limestone that is able to block the salty humidity that rises up from below, therefore isolating the wall above the strip itself. Unfortunately, as the level of the high waters gradually rises, this strip of pietra d'Istria ends up being submerged and no longer isolates the stone above. But there are solutions. For example, it is possible, by means of a horizontal cut, to insert a membrane at the base of the buildings that create a barrier against the attack of the salt water. Or chemical materials could be placed directly into the walls to make them waterproof.
Abbiamo delle tecniche di impermeabilizzazione dietro le murature di questi edifici che permettono la conservazione delle murature originarie o comunque il mantenimento dei materiali tradizionali della città per tutelare questi edifici, quindi senza trasformare la natura di queste situazioni.
Venice is crisscrossed by 177 canals, the Grand Canal being the largest. It is almost 4 kilometres long and divides the old centre in two, tracing a shape like a backwards S. This is the symbol that we find in stylised form in the iron on every Venetian gondola. The two wings of the wonderful palaces that accompany us throughout the length of the Grand Canal give the city of Venice the elegance and nobility that has made it internationally famous. The poetic beauty of this amazing city can only be appreciated from a boat. This canal was the location of the most coveted buildings belonging to the upper classes, a place to flaunt their wealth. It was a prestigious address equivalent to appearing in the Golden Book of Venetian nobility. This competition to build the most beautiful palace along the Grand Canal gave Venice a pride in its own identity and a profound connection to the lagoon. But if we look deeper, we can see that even the Grand Canal is sick and threatened by a number of serious problems. Most of the buildings are seriously damaged at the bottom. The wood is rotten, the metal parts corroded by salt water. The Grand Canal remains the main transport axis in the centre, so it experiences heavy traffic. Extremely heavy traffic. The waves created by the continuous flow of boats are seriously threatening the health of these beautiful buildings, the bases of which are in terrible condition, requiring urgent attention. The restoration of these buildings is extremely complex and very costly.
Gli interventi che riguardano questo grandissimo cantiere, il grande cantiere di restauro aperto in questo momento a Venezia, riguardano innanzitutto il consolidamento dell'edificio. Il consolidamento significa dalle fondazioni alle murature in elevazione e quindi levare singoli mattoni e andare a sostituirli là dove sono ammalorati, deteriorati.
Water has eroded the higher parts of the facades, infiltrating the walls and rising.
L'acqua dobbiamo pensare che entra all'interno degli edifici in due modi. Un modo è nel momento in cui si alza il livello dell'acqua nei canali, direttamente per intenderci dalle porte. L'altro modo invece è dal sottosuolo e quindi l'acqua zampilla dai pavimenti e dai muri che ovviamente pescano, come noi diciamo, nell'acqua.
One way to stop the ground floors of buildings flooding is to build a large holding tank that wraps around and protects the foundations of the houses. It is like supporting the entire building on a boat. The water can no longer enter.
Vengono realizzate pertanto queste vasche in cemento che sono veramente dei catini. Noi dobbiamo pensare che siamo in questo momento con i nostri piedi all'interno di un catino di cemento armato che viene realizzato stanza per stanza in modo da impedire all'acqua di entrare appunto dalle murature e dal pavimento.
The Grand Canal is the location of one of the most important museums in Venice, the Peggy Guggenheim Collection. The museum houses an extraordinary collection of contemporary art that includes work by Picasso, Duchamp, Magritte, Dali, and Pollock.
My name is Philip Rylands. I'm the director of the Peggy Guggenheim Collection, which forms a part of the Solomon R. Guggenheim Foundation in New York. We find ourselves running a museum of 20th century art on the Grand Canal of Venice, an American museum, nonetheless, based here in Italy.
Palazzo Venier dei Leoni, which dates from the 18th century, was completely reconstructed to house the valuable art collection of the American tycoon Peggy Guggenheim.
We are in a city which is subject to high tides. Now here again, Peggy was clever and fortunate in her choice because she chose a home and therefore and also her museum in an unfinished 18th century palace, all of which had been raised probably at least 1.5 meters above street level in the rest of the city. So the museum is well above any possible high tide.
The key question for the defence of Venice from the water is how much the defence can be achieved. In the most ancient and precious areas, you cannot raise the banks and floors in an undifferentiated way without altering the fabric of the building, both from the functional point of view and from the architectural point of view.
Il fatto di sollevare questo pavimento all'interno oltre il 1,23 m avrebbe comportato uno snaturare completamente tutti gli spazi interni.
Moreover, the environment and city of Venice is severely threatened by a serious problem. The foundations that support the buildings are slowly sinking, making the city more vulnerable to the tides. The whole is then compounded by the gradual rise in sea levels caused by global warming. How can Venice be saved? The hope that the city and its population will have a future is represented by a project of enormous proportions, the M.O.S.E system. The M.O.S.E project is part of a general plan to protect Venice and its lagoon, a project that places Italy at the pinnacle of international research and experimentation in this sector. It is run by the New Venice Consortium.
Per sistema MOSE si intende un insieme integrato di opere, barriere mobili alle 3 bocche di porto per separare la laguna dal mare durante le acque alte, le alte maree, e interventi in laguna per migliorarne la qualità, in quanto da sempre abbiamo tenuto insieme la salvaguardia fisica e ambientale delle lagune di Venezia.
The destinies of Venice and its lagoon are inextricably linked to that of the seabed, which is seriously compromised, in part due to excavations and the removal of sediment, which was necessary in order to create deep canals for the passage of maritime transport. One essential action necessary in order to limit the damage created by the lowering of the lagoon floor is to strengthen the banks of the lagoon where they protrude into the water flooded at high water, thereby maintaining the delicate balance between land and water. It is a question of artificially reconstructing the banks by releasing mud and sediment in order to restore the original lagoon environment. At the dawn of time, this is how the uncontaminated lagoon must have been. The environment discovered by the populations who, fleeing the barbarian invasions in the 5th century AD, founded the Venice of today. They constructed little settlements on piles, living by fishing and exploiting the raw material that the lagoon offered: salt. Another intervention that is important for safeguarding the lagoon, and therefore Venice, is the consolidation of the Venetian coast. The operation involves around 60 kilometres of coastline and aims to prevent erosion and defend the lagoon and the environments near the sea from storms, thereby also improving the landscape and the coastal environment. The dunes, an integral part of the coastline, are constructed of sand and consolidated by planting grasses and bushes characteristic of coastal areas. This also allows these areas to be repopulated by many species that find a suitable environment to take refuge in and to sustain them. If Venice is to be saved, something must also be done about the petrochemical works in Marghera. which have been emitting pollutants for many years. Interventions have been carried out to avoid industrial waste being dumped into the waters of the lagoon, with a significant improvement in the entire ecosystem. This work along the coast and in the lagoon, much of it completed or well underway, is the most important programme for defending, recovering or improving the environment that the Italian state has ever undertaken. But the most important element in the struggle against high water is the Mose project. This is a system of enormous moving floodgates placed at the 3 inlets that will serve to isolate the Venice lagoon and temporarily prevent water from the Adriatic Sea entering it. It is one of the most complex and carefully studied operations of recent decades and has attracted the leading international experts in the field and involves some of the most innovative and cutting-edge techniques of environmental engineering.
Il progetto MO.S.E è la più grande opera di ingegneria in costruzione in Europa in questo momento. Per progetto MO.S.E intendiamo le 4 barriere che stiamo costruendo alle bocche di porto della laguna di Venezia per una lunghezza complessiva di 1600 metri, 78 paratoie, 4 conche di navigazione, tutti gli impianti e gli edifici tecnici necessari al funzionamento delle stesse.
Mose is the most important infrastructure ever built in Italy, financed entirely with public funds and with a total of around 3,000 people involved in the operations. The project was first mooted in the 1970s as part of initiatives to protect Venice and its lagoon following the flood of November 4th, 1966. At the time, a special Italian law established the principle that the defence of Venice was a matter of paramount national interest. Mose consists of 4 modules. 1 in the mouth of Chioggia in the south. 1 closing the mouth of Mare Mocco, the central inlet to the lagoon and the deepest. While at the opening of the Lido in the north, there are 2 gates, with an artificial island located in the centre of the inlet supporting both the gates. Mose is composed of a system of movable, retractable barriers.
Ciascuna barriera è composta di paratoie che sono delle scatole di acciaio completamente indipendenti l'una dall'altra. Le dimensioni medie sono 20 metri di larghezza, dai 18 ai 28 metri di lunghezza, a seconda della profondità della bocca in cui le paratoie saranno installate, e lo spessore varia dai 3,5 ai 5 metri.
The gates are called gravity dams, in that under normal conditions they are full of water and remain lying on the bottom, where they are housed in prefabricated concrete caissons that rest on the seabed, itself reinforced. When a tide of over 110 centimetres is forecast, the water inside the gates is expelled by the introduction of compressed air. In this way, the structures are raised, turning on the axis of the hinges until they emerge, temporarily isolating the lagoon from the rest of the sea and stopping the flow of the tide. In the shipyard of the Lido port, the caissons that will house the cofferdams and will also contain equipment to operate the barriers and tunnels for technical inspections are being built.
Abbiamo opportunamente attrezzato questo porto creando un bacino, quindi mettendolo all'asciutto, un bacino che ha un'area di circa 50.000 metri quadrati, e al suo interno stiamo costruendo i 9 cassoni, lavorando a circa 10 metri sotto il livello medio del mare.
Attualmente il cassone è all'esterno, cioè all'aria aperta. Una volta completate tutte le opere di finitura dovremo allagare la tura e fare in modo che il cassone possa galleggiare e quindi essere trasportato nella posizione dove dovrà essere poi affondato.
But how does this structure work? The hinge is the element that connects the barrier to the housing and allows the barriers to move, and thus it is the basis of the very concept of a mobile defense system.
Le cerniere sono strutture che possono essere suddivise in 3 parti funzionali. Una parte maschio, solidale alla paratoia, una parte femmina, solidale alla coperta del cassone, e poi un gruppo connettore che è contenuto all'interno del cassone stesso. Questo locale in particolare c'è il cuore del sistema MO.S.E. È grazie a questa struttura che viene trattenuto al cassone la paratoia stessa. Grazie al gruppo di aggancio e tensionamento che si può insufflare l'aria proveniente dagli impianti meccanici all'interno della paratoia, permettendo quindi a questa di sollevarsi o di abbassarsi.
The height of 110 centimeters, at which points the barriers will come into operation, has been fixed as the optimum height with respect to the current level of the sea. Furthermore, depending on the winds, pressure and magnitude of the tides, the system can be managed in different ways, with differentiated closure of the inlets or partial closures of each inlet.
Non sarà necessario per le maree più frequenti chiudere tutta la barriera, ma sarà sufficiente sollevare 2 o 3 elementi per ciascuna barriera. Riusciremo in questo modo a ridurre il livello dell'acqua nei centri storici lagunari senza chiudere e separare la laguna dal mare.
Venice has to live with its recent and distant past. Only through this coexistence will it find solutions to the problems that plague the city and its lagoon. Several bodies are acting to try to return to the delicate balance of the waters of the lagoon, to recover its stability, despite its fragility. They are battling against high water, storms, and coastal erosion. Mose has raised great expectations. Mose represents a great hope for protecting this unique heritage site and restoring the ancient relationship between the Adriatic Sea and Venice.